Imagine drifting over a coral reef in the warm, clear waters of the Caribbean. The sunlight ripples down through the blue, and there, hovering almost motionless above the coral, is one of the most beautiful creatures in the entire ocean. It is banded in bold stripes of red, brown, and white, and spreading out from its body in every direction is a fan of long, delicate, feathery fins, drifting in the current like the mane of a lion or the plumes of some impossible flower. It looks like a living work of art, calm, graceful, and utterly unbothered. And it is one of the most destructive animals in the sea. That gorgeous, drifting creature is a lionfish, and behind that beauty is a mouthful of hidden hunger and a crown of venomous spines. And right now, across the warm waters of the Atlantic, the Caribbean, and the Gulf of Mexico, this single species has exploded into a full-blown invasion, spreading across thousands of miles of reef, devouring everything small enough to swallow, and pushing fragile coral ecosystems toward collapse. And so, in one of the strangest turnarounds in all of modern nature, human beings have become the lionfish's only real predator. Across the invaded seas, divers now hunt these fish by the hundreds of thousands, spearing them one by one on the reefs, holding contests to see who can remove the most, and turning this beautiful invader into something remarkable, a delicious meal on a dinner plate, and even jewelry made from its own venomous spines. It is a war being fought underwater, fish by fish, and it is a rare case where hunting an animal and eating it is not just allowed, but actively helps to save an entire ecosystem. So how did a fish from the far side of the world end up taking over the reefs of the Atlantic? How does an animal armed with venomous spines get hunted, handled, and turned into food without anyone getting hurt? And how did eating a fish become one of the most effective ways to protect the ocean? Stay with me, because we are going to follow the whole story, from the beautiful, hungry invader hovering over the coral, through the divers who hunt it in the deep, all the way to the kitchen and the plate. It is stranger and more surprising than you would ever guess from a fish this pretty. If you enjoy a slow, honest look at the hidden problems of the natural world and at where things really come from, take a second to subscribe before we begin, and tell me down in the comments what part of the world you are watching from today. I always like to know. Let's begin by getting to know the animal itself, because to understand the disaster, you first have to understand just how perfectly this fish is built to be a conqueror. The lionfish is a member of the scorpionfish family, a group famous for one thing: venom. A grown lionfish is usually somewhere between about a foot and a foot and a half long, not a large fish at all, but its spreading fins make it look far bigger. Those magnificent fan-like fins serve two purposes. The soft, feathery ones are used with astonishing skill for hunting, and the others, the long spines rising from its back, its sides, and beneath it, are weapons. A lionfish carries a crown of these venomous spines, 18 of them in total on most individuals, and each one is tipped with venom powerful enough to cause a human being excruciating pain. It is important to understand exactly what those spines are for. They are not for catching prey. They are purely defensive, a warning and a shield that says to any larger fish, do not even think about it. And that warning works beautifully. In the lionfish's native home, on the reefs of the Indian Ocean and the Western Pacific, everything has evolved alongside it for millions of years. The local predators know exactly what those stripes and spines mean, and they leave the lionfish well alone, while its own numbers are kept naturally in check by the balance of its home ecosystem. There, it is simply one more beautiful, venomous reef fish among many, living in harmony with the world around it. The trouble, the whole enormous trouble, begins when you take this animal out of the world it belongs to and drop it into a world that has never seen anything like it before. So how did a fish from the Indo-Pacific end up on the reefs of Florida and the Caribbean, half a world away from home? The answer, as with so many invasions, comes back to people, and specifically to the aquarium trade. The lionfish is so stunningly beautiful that it became a prized fish for home aquariums, shipped around the world and kept in tanks by enthusiasts. But a lionfish is a demanding, hungry, venomous pet, and it grows, and somewhere along the way, most likely off the coast of Florida several decades ago, some of these fish ended up in the open ocean. Perhaps they were deliberately released by owners who no longer wanted them. Perhaps some escaped. However exactly it happened, a small number of lionfish, animals that had no business being in the Atlantic at all, found themselves swimming free in warm American waters. And they found something close to paradise. Because the Western Atlantic, the Caribbean, and the Gulf of Mexico turned out to be almost perfectly suited to the lionfish, and, crucially, the fish there had never encountered anything like it. From that first small handful of released animals, the lionfish began one of the fastest and most dramatic marine invasions ever recorded. Within just a couple of decades, it spread up the southeastern coast of the United States, down through the Caribbean islands, into the Gulf of Mexico, and across to the coasts of Central and South America, colonizing thousands of miles of reef and coastline. Today, in many of these places, the lionfish is one of the most common predatory fish on the reef, found from the shallows all the way down into deep water beyond the reach of most divers. What started as a few aquarium escapees became a population in the millions, blanketing the region. To understand why this invasion has been so devastating, you have to look at the 4 extraordinary advantages that make the lionfish such a perfect conqueror in these new waters. The first, and most important, is that here it has almost no natural predators. Remember, in its native seas, other animals grew up alongside the lionfish and learned to respect its venomous spines. But in the Atlantic and the Caribbean, the local groupers, sharks, and other big fish have never seen anything like it. They do not recognize it as prey, and if they were foolish enough to try, those 18 venomous spines would quickly teach them a painful lesson. So the lionfish drifts across these reefs almost completely unthreatened, free to hunt and breed without fear. A beautiful stranger that nothing in this world knows how to eat. The second advantage is its appetite, and this is where the real damage is done, because the lionfish is a staggeringly effective and voracious predator. It is an ambush hunter, and it uses those soft, fanned fins with remarkable cunning, slowly herding and cornering smaller fish, spreading its fins like a net to trap them against the coral, and then striking. And when it strikes, it does so with terrifying speed, opening its large mouth and creating a sudden suction that pulls the prey in whole in a fraction of a second. A lionfish will eat almost any fish or crustacean small enough to fit in its mouth, and its mouth and its stomach can stretch to an astonishing degree, allowing it to swallow prey up to around half its own length, and its stomach can expand to many times its normal size to hold the feast. It eats and eats and eats. Studies on invaded reefs have found lionfish stomachs crammed full of dozens of small native fish, and a single lionfish can dramatically reduce the number of young fish on a patch of reef in a shockingly short time. The third advantage is how fast it multiplies. The lionfish is a breeding machine. In these warm waters, a female does not breed just once a year, but again and again, all year round. Each time she releases her eggs, bound together in 2 buoyant, jelly-like masses that float up into the water column and, across a single year, One female can release somewhere in the region of 2 million eggs. 2 million from one fish in 1 year. Those floating egg masses are then carried far and wide on the ocean currents before the young hatch and settle. Which means the lionfish does not just breed explosively, it spreads explosively too, seeding new reefs hundreds of miles from where the eggs were laid. It is almost impossible to fight something that reproduces on that scale. And the fourth advantage is its sheer toughness and adaptability. The lionfish is not fussy. It thrives in a huge range of conditions, in warm water and cooler water, in shallow sunlit reefs, and in the dim depths far below, in coral reefs, rocky bottoms, seagrass beds, mangroves, and even around shipwrecks and artificial structures. It can be found just beneath the surface, and it can be found hundreds of feet down, deeper than any recreational diver can safely go. This last point matters enormously, because it means that even where divers work hard to remove lionfish from the shallow reefs, there is always a vast, untouchable population living in the deep, ready to breed and resupply the shallows. Put those four advantages together: no predators, an endless appetite, explosive breeding, and total adaptability, and you have as close to a perfect invader as the ocean has ever produced. Now let's look at what all of this actually does to a reef, because the consequences are severe. A healthy coral reef is one of the most crowded and finely balanced ecosystems on the planet, home to a dazzling variety of fish, each with its own role to play. Into this delicate world drops the lionfish, a hungry newcomer with no natural check on its numbers, and it begins to eat its way through the reef's future. Because the fish it targets most are the small ones and the young ones, the juveniles of dozens of native species. On some invaded reefs, researchers have recorded staggering declines in the number of small native fish after lionfish moved in, with local populations of some species falling dramatically. The lionfish is, in effect, eating the reef's next generation before it can grow up. And the harm spreads far beyond just the fish that get eaten. Many of the small fish the lionfish devours are the very species that keep a reef healthy. Some of them are herbivores, the grazers that spend their days nibbling algae off the coral. On a balanced reef, these grazers are essential because they keep the fast-growing algae from overwhelming and smothering the coral. When the lionfish eats too many of these little grazers, the algae is free to grow unchecked, spreading over the reef and choking the coral beneath it. So the lionfish does not just reduce the number of fish, it can actually help tip an entire reef from a living, coral-dominated system toward a struggling, algae-covered one. On top of that, many of the young fish it eats are the juveniles of species that people depend on, the young snapper and grouper that would one day support fishing communities. By devouring them young, the lionfish strikes at both the health of the reef and the livelihoods of the people who live beside it. At a time when the world's coral reefs are already under enormous stress from warming seas and other pressures, the lionfish is one more heavy blow against ecosystems that can least afford it. Now, before we get to how people are fighting back, we have to talk properly about those famous venomous spines, because they are central to the whole story, both to the animal's success and to the challenge of handling it. If you are finding this dive into a hidden ocean problem fascinating, this would be a perfect moment to hit that like button. It genuinely helps more people discover the channel. Now, about that venom. The lionfish's venom is carried in the long spines, and only in the spines, delivered through a groove along each one when the spine punctures the skin. A sting from a lionfish is, by all accounts, intensely, memorably painful, causing severe throbbing pain, swelling, and discomfort that can last for hours. For most healthy people, it is not deadly, and the pain can be eased, notably by soaking the area in hot water, which helps break down the venom. But it is a genuinely nasty experience and a real hazard for anyone who handles these fish carelessly. This venom is exactly why the lionfish is so untouchable on the reef, and it is exactly why hunting and handling them takes real care and skill. But here is the single most important thing to understand about that venom, and it is the fact that makes this whole story possible. The venom is only in the spines. It is not in the flesh. The meat of the lionfish, the white fillet inside, is completely free of venom and is perfectly safe and, as we will see, absolutely delicious to eat. The venom is a defensive weapon on the outside of the animal, not a poison running through its body. So once those spines have been carefully removed, which is a routine and straightforward job for anyone who knows how, the fish is no more dangerous than any other, and it becomes one of the finest, most sought-after fish in the whole region. Hold on to that fact, because it is the key that turns a plague into a feast. So, faced with an unstoppable, beautiful, venomous invader that nothing in the local ocean will eat, what can actually be done? For once, the answer is refreshingly direct. If no natural predator will hunt the lionfish, then people will. Human divers have stepped in to become the missing predator, and hunting lionfish has grown into a widespread and genuinely important activity across the invaded region. And the way it is done is beautifully simple and low-tech. Because lionfish do not usually take a baited hook the way other fish do, the main way to catch them is to go down and get them by hand, one at a time, with a spear. Divers, both recreational and professional, descend onto the reefs armed with short, simple spears, often a type called a pole spear or a Hawaiian sling, and they hunt the lionfish where it lives. And here, the lionfish's own nature works against it. Remember, in these waters, it has no natural predators, and so it has never learned to fear anything. When a diver approaches, a lionfish will very often simply hover there, calm and unbothered, exactly as it does with everything else, not understanding that this strange visitor is a threat. This lack of fear, which serves it so well against confused local fish, makes it relatively easy for a skilled diver to get close and take a careful, well-aimed shot. Of course, once the fish is speared, the real care begins, because those venomous spines are still very much a danger. Experienced hunters use special puncture-resistant gloves and containers, and they have a whole set of practiced techniques for safely collecting speared lionfish and clipping away the spines so that they can bring their catch back to the surface without a painful sting. It is a job that rewards calm hands and respect for the animal, right up to the very end. To rally people to the cause, whole communities have turned lionfish hunting into events and competitions, often called lionfish derbies or tournaments. On these days, teams of divers compete over a set period to remove as many lionfish as they possibly can from the reefs, and the results can be remarkable, with hundreds or even thousands of lionfish taken from a region in a single day, all while raising awareness and gathering valuable information for scientists. These derbies have become a cornerstone of the fight, a way of turning a grim ecological problem into a shared community effort, complete with prizes, cooking demonstrations, and a real sense of doing something useful. Alongside the divers, researchers and engineers are also working on other tools, including specially designed traps that could one day help reach the deep-water lionfish that no diver can safely touch. But for now, the diver with a spear remains the single most effective weapon there is. And it is important to be honest about the scale of the challenge. Even with all these efforts, Even with countless divers and derbies removing huge numbers of fish, no one seriously believes the lionfish can be completely wiped out of the Atlantic. Remember those 2 million eggs per female per year? And that vast reservoir of fish living in the deep, far below where anyone can reach? The realistic goal is not eradication, it is control. By hunting hard and hunting constantly, divers can keep the lionfish numbers down on the reefs that matter most, protecting local fish populations, giving native species a chance to recover, and holding the line in the places people care about, even as the invader remains a permanent part of these seas. It is not a war that will ever truly be won, but it is one that is very much worth fighting, reef by reef, dive by dive. So all these lionfish are being pulled off the reefs by the thousand. What happens to them next? And this is the part that turns the whole grim story into something genuinely hopeful and even delicious. Because the lionfish, that beautiful venomous plague, turns out to be one of the best eating fish in the entire ocean. And this has given rise to a wonderful, simple rallying cry that has spread all across the invaded region. Eat them to beat them. The idea is beautifully straightforward. If we can create a real demand for lionfish as food, then there is a strong, lasting reason for people to keep hunting them. And every lionfish that ends up on a plate is one less lionfish eating its way through the reef. Once the fish reaches the surface and the dock, the first step is dealing with those spines. A worker carefully trims away the venomous spines with scissors or shears, a quick and routine task, after which the fish is completely safe to handle. From there, the lionfish is filleted much like any other fish, and here is where people are so pleasantly surprised. Beneath those dramatic fins and spines, the lionfish yields 2 clean, white, boneless fillets of genuinely superb quality. The meat is white, delicate and flaky, with a mild, slightly buttery, almost sweet flavor, and many chefs and seafood lovers rank it as good as or better than far more famous fish like snapper, grouper, or hogfish. It can be cooked in almost any way you like, fried, grilled, baked, or served raw as sushi and ceviche, and it is increasingly featured on the menus of restaurants across Florida, the Caribbean, and beyond, often proudly labeled as a sustainable, reef-saving choice. There is a real and growing market for it, sold to restaurants and at markets as a premium, exotic, and environmentally friendly seafood. The very fish that is devastating the reef is being served, quite deliciously, as the solution. And the meat is not even the whole story, because clever, creative people have found a way to use another part of this animal too, the very spines and fins that make it so dangerous. Across the invaded region, small artisans and jewelry makers collect the striking, colorful spines and fins of the lionfish and craft them into beautiful jewelry, earrings, necklaces, and pendants that turn the animal's own weapons into wearable art. The venom, of course, breaks down and is neutralized once the spines are properly cleaned and dried, so the finished jewelry is perfectly safe to wear. It is a small but lovely cottage industry, one more way of taking a destructive invader and turning as much of it as possible into something of value, so that even its most fearsome feature is put to good use. Between the delicious fillets and the striking jewelry, remarkably little of the hunted lionfish goes to waste. So we have this strange and rather beautiful cycle. A gorgeous fish that became a plague, an army of divers who rose to hunt it, and a venomous invader transformed into a gourmet meal and a piece of jewelry. Before we come to the final, most thought-provoking part of the story, I would genuinely love to hear from you. Down in the comments, tell me the single most surprising thing you have learned about the lionfish so far. And would you try it, now that you know the whole story? And if you have not yet, subscribe so the next journey like this one finds its way to you. Because there is a deeper truth tangled up in all of this. And it is the part that really makes you stop and think. Here is the honest heart of the lionfish story. Just like so many invasions, this one is not really the animal's fault at all. The lionfish did nothing wrong. It did not plot to conquer the Atlantic. It is simply a superbly evolved fish that was taken from the ocean it belonged to and released by human hands into an ocean where it did not. Every one of the millions of lionfish now blanketing the reefs of the Caribbean is descended from a small number of animals that people brought across the world for their beauty, and then let loose where they never should have been. The invasion is not a story about a wicked fish. It is, once again, a story about us, and about how one careless act can ripple outward across an entire ocean and change it forever. And yet, out of that mistake has come something genuinely rare and encouraging. In most cases, when humans hunt and eat a wild animal in large numbers, we damage its population and harm the environment. The lionfish is one of the few situations on Earth where the exact opposite is true. Here, hunting the animal and putting it on our plates is not a harm at all. It is a genuine act of conservation. Every lionfish speared and eaten helps protect the native fish, the reefs, and the fishing communities of an entire region. It is one of the only times you can sit down to a delicious dinner and know that the meal itself is helping to heal the sea. That is a genuinely hopeful idea, and it has turned countless divers, chefs, and diners into unlikely defenders of the reef. But we should be honest, too, about the limits of it. As remarkable as the fillets and the derbies and the jewelry are, the lionfish is here to stay. We are not going to spear our way to an empty ocean, not against 2 million eggs a year and a hidden army in the deep. What all of this really represents is not victory, but a thoughtful, determined, and rather beautiful way of managing a problem we created, of turning an ecological disaster into food, into livelihoods, into community, and into a small, daily act of care for the reef. It is people making the very best of a difficult situation, and doing it with spears, with recipes, and with a sense of purpose. So the next time you see a photograph of a lionfish, hanging there over the coral in all its striped, feathery, venomous glory, I hope you will remember the whole of it. Remember that it is one of the most beautiful animals in the sea, and one of the most damaging in the wrong place. Remember the 18 venomous spines and the endless appetite, the 2 million floating eggs and the reefs stripped of their young fish. Remember the divers descending with their spears to become the predator the ocean is missing, and the strange, wonderful truth that this fierce invader ends its journey as a delicate white fillet on a plate and a piece of jewelry on someone's ear. And remember, above all, the lesson underneath it all, that this whole invasion began not with the fish, but with us, and that in eating it, we are simply trying to set right, one careful dive and one delicious meal at a time, a mistake of our own making. Thank you for spending this time with me, and for looking a little closer at a hidden struggle unfolding beneath the waves, in a world most people never see. If it was worth your while, leave a like, subscribe so you do not miss the next journey, and tell me in the comments where in the world you are watching from. I read them, and I am always glad to know who is out there. Until next time, keep looking closely.